It's not hyperbole to say that Marvel's brand is having a bit of an existential moment. I mean, I've talked about it ad nauseum at the channel at this point, so I mean, if this is your first time hearing it, I'd be shocked, but it's something that warrants bringing up because it wasn't that long ago that the MCU was striking a generational balance between a near guarantee of box office success and a level of quality control that ensured, at minimum, if you went to the theater opening weekend, you'd be seeing a pretty solid action flick. In the lead up to 2019's Avengers Endgame, the studio demonstrated a keen knack for learning lessons and adjusting its course to optimize their formula. Each phase of this great Hollywood experiment was characterized by growth and improvement. In Phase 1, they grounded the franchise in strong characters. Yes, I'm even including The Incredible Hulk in that because I unabashedly enjoy that film, sue me. Kevin Feige, Jon Favreau, Kenneth Branagh, and Joe Johnston laid the foundation for a winning ensemble. They knew this was essential to success. Sure, not everyone took to Thor the same way I did. I actually have a video talking about why that film's super underrated. You should definitely check that out. But Iron Man and Captain America exploded out of the gate in iconic fashion. In Phase 2, through a process of trial and error, they found the tone. For years, the conventional wisdom was that Thor: The Dark World was the MCU's only true misfire, and Age of Ultron was an underwhelming tonal mismatch. For the record, my opinion of both of these films, especially Age of Ultron, has greatly improved over the years. With the unlikely success of Guardians of the Galaxy, Marvel's riskiest proposition to date, the edgy, irreverent tone James Gunn had honed in the world of trauma and independent genre film became the MCU's comedic brand. Audiences loved the ragtag ensemble of the Guardians, and they appreciated the light comedic outing of Ant-Man. At this point, the studio was no longer limited to audience recognition of their most recognizable characters. They had managed to reach the world by finding a balance of broadly appealing comedy, needle drops, and humanity to bridge the gap to those previously uninterested in comic book movies. And with the introduction of the Russo brothers to Captain America: The Winter Soldier, proving deft hands in juggling the franchise's growing ensemble, then came Phase 3, the stratosphere. The success seemed unbounded by conventional metrics. The Russos' ensemble work in Captain America: Civil War gave the previous Avengers films a run for their money. The deeply personal and heartfelt approach to Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 proved that the success of the first film was not a flash in the pan, but evidence of a filmmaker at the top of his game. The introductions of Tom Holland's Spider-Man and Ryan Coogler's Black Panther proved that the ensemble we knew and loved had been fundamentally incomplete. And while, if you followed me for any amount of time, you'll know I don't love Taika Waititi's take on Thor, there's no denying the tonal reset of Ragnarok, back when, Waititi was still trying, added a zany counterpoint to Gunn's Edge that found the perfect intersection of comedy for these colorful properties audiences simply adore. After this series of home runs, they brought all of the aforementioned success to a seemingly impossible conclusion in Avengers Endgame, the most ambitious cross-property event in film history. And the movie was pretty fucking good. The Russo brothers took the Back to the Future 2 template and sent all of our beloved characters back through the history of the franchise to revisit their journey with fresh eyes. For the audience, it was a nostalgic celebration, but it managed to work as a film unto itself. From critical acclaim to box office revenue and audience reception, it could not have been a bigger success. But in bringing this titanic project to a close, there was an undeniable elephant in the room that filled the studio with dread. What the hell do we do next? I wish I could tell you that they had a good answer to this question, but we've all been wandering in the same wilderness for the past 6 years. The multiverse, for its endless possibilities, has mostly represented a lack of focus for a machine that was once a hit factory. The worst of the bunch, the Marvels, Eternals, Thor 4, and Brave New World, all have good ideas on paper, but in execution are profoundly boring and ill-defined, fundamentally lacking the charm that made the MCU such a success to begin with. The middling to good titles like Doctor Strange 2, Spider-Man: No Way Home, and Deadpool and Wolverine all rely so heavily on a self-referential nostalgia so as to feel a little cheap. That's not even taking into account how an onslaught of middling to downright atrocious TV shows further diluted the brand, culminating in what can only be described as Marvel fatigue. Even when they're good enough, they can't help but evoke memories of a time when you'd see a Marvel movie opening weekend with a packed crowd and know you were in for a party. But it's not enough to reference the past. You have to go back and understand the elemental qualities that made these movies so appealing to begin with. And with the Thunderbolts, holy shit, Thank God they've fucking done it. Now, before I continue, I just want to breathe a sigh of relief, right? Breathe one with me if you like. All right, let's go. 3, 2, 1. Fuck yes, man. That's awesome. Thunderbolts fucking rocks. And not just in its clearing of a relatively low bar set by years of uncertainty. No, this movie is, in its bones, a return to form that reconnects with the core values of the MCU that charted a course for enduring success in 2008. And before you misinterpret this preamble as suggesting that this is Marvel at its biggest or at its strangest, it's not that at all. It's relatively pared back in comparison to recent efforts, and it's not liable to blow your wig off with major lore revelations or references to beloved comics. It's not a multiverse project, it's not overtly referential, and it doesn't reward countless hours of Disney Plus viewing. For a small number of fans, perhaps that will be disappointing, but I suspect that for most, Thunderbolts will be a breath of fresh air. The MCU lives and dies by its characters, a core value seemingly forgotten over the last half-decade, but with Thunderbolts, the chemistry of the ensemble is once again front and center. This is a movie that prioritizes the people over the cameos and interconnectivity. It is, in many readily apparent ways, a spiritual successor to James Gunn's Guardians trilogy, and proof that Marvel has learned, in a manner of speaking, that if they want to have another Phase 3, they must first have another Phase 1. The film even acknowledges this as a sort of metatext. The MCU started off as an underdog before it became the force of nature we now recognize. It's easy to look back on the franchise through 2025 goggles and think of Robert Downey Jr. and Chris Evans as being massive stars and the comic book characters as the face of a merchandising giant. But there was a time when comic books, believe it or not, were a niche interest. For nerds, if you will. But Marvel managed to transmute the appeal to the mainstream and recontextualize the legacy of Stan Lee forever. The problem is that they became way too confident on the other side of that transformation and lost touch with the appeal and what engaged the fans from day one. With Thunderbolts, they're underdogs again, making a film about, well, underdogs. It's not just a good MCU movie, it's a damn good movie during which you forget you're watching a Marvel movie. It has meaningful insight into life, depression, substance abuse, self-worth, self-image, things that we all resonate with all too well. The ideas are mature and accessible to adults, but the conduit is something that appeals to moviegoers of all ages. In the early days, Marvel stories were about flawed people wrestling with ego, power, responsibility, all within the context of their own neurotic personalities. They represented the coming together of people from different backgrounds in service of a common goal, which, in a sense, was also what Marvel films did for their audience. They brought comic book nerds, movie lovers, and casual cinema goers together, offering a little something for everyone. When they began to take this for granted, they started to lose their audience. But with Thunderbolts, it's back to basics, back to the individuals, and here is a little something for everyone. The core plot conflict of Thunderbolts is introduced during an early scene wherein CIA Director Valentina Allegra de Fontaine, played by a seemingly delighted Julia Louis-Dreyfus and a thinly veiled Tulsi Gabbard stand-in, is being grilled by a congressional committee for some alleged dirty dealings. She has been proximate to shady activity and individuals in service of a secret project, which we will eventually learn to be the Sentry initiative. She explains that now that the Avengers have taken a step back, it is the responsibility of the American government to protect its people with a comparable heroic figure. What she doesn't tell them is that she has been spearheading an initiative to create a superhero by injecting civilian volunteers with a serum that will, in success, make them invincible, godlike. However, the paper trail of what she believes to be a failed experiment would constitute more than grounds for impeachment. For this reason, she sends all of her mercenary assets to a secret base under the false pretense that they will each be assassinating a would-be spy. What they don't realize is that they're all being lured to the same trap, to be incinerated. These expendables? You guessed it, baby, these are the Thunderbolts. What seems a foolproof plan to tie up loose ends unwittingly creates Valentina's greatest nightmare, a group of hardened killers allergic to teamwork but willing to make an exception just this once to get revenge on a person who has pissed them all off real bad. It's a fun setup. It's great. The dichotomy of organic heroes, the Thunderbolts, versus a cruel, solitary, institutional creation, Sentry, is an apt characterization of this existential moment for Marvel. The studio is trying so hard to skip the hard work of earning audience trust by creating new heroes over time that they funneled all of their endgame earnings and goodwill into a Sentry. They want to create a perfect product to protect their bottom line. But the truth is that the only way to do that is to collaborate with an unlikely group of heroes in pursuit of a common personal goal. Now, let's talk a bit about those heroes. Thunderbolts opens with a thunderous reminder that Florence Pugh is one of the most fun actors that we've got working right now, and that Yelena is probably the best new character the MCU has introduced. We're granted a confessional window into her listless interiority, explaining her general boredom and disconnect with her job, the walking, breathing embodiment of superhero fatigue, before we're suddenly thrust into a thrilling action set piece where she infiltrates and ultimately blows up a research lab to cover up Valentina's tracks. Within minutes, the movie establishes its voice and priorities, balancing meaningful characterization against well-choreographed practical action and the comedic droll bureaucracy of being a hero for hire in service of a dumb politician. Yelena is clearly a very capable mercenary, but she's also stuck in a place of depression and disconnect after the loss of Natasha and a lack of personally meaningful work. While this is literal story text, it also speaks to the general state of the MCU. There are great writers and directors working for a corporation whose interests do not align with their own. They're provided work and meaningful pay, but it rings hollow because the motivations start on the corporate end rather than privileging the skills and interests of those doing the dirty work. Thunderbolts is a movie about an unlikely ensemble of heroes joining forces when they realize their employer no longer has their best interests at heart. But in a meta sense, filmmaker Jake Schreier and his exceptional cast have joined forces to make a genuinely good ensemble film, Marvel be damned. And it can't just be Yelena. She's gonna need some help. Ghost represents a counterpart to Yelena. She keeps her cards close to her chest, but we sense their shared kinship in being child experiments raised for a single purpose. Ghost kills Taskmaster in the vault, but later, when Yelena illuminates Taskmaster's history, Ghost is sympathetic to the fact that, viewed from a particular perspective, they could all be perceived as the same kind of mercenary. Near the end of the film, there's a moment where Valentina explains that there are no heroes, only bad guys and worse guys. And it's a moment of manipulation not meant to be interpreted as the film's perspective. That said, Ghost and Yelena understand that there is a fine line between hero and villain, and that they both have walked it. Now, the guy most baked into the bureaucratic pie is Bucky. He's in a real limbo here. In the wake of Endgame and the Infinity Saga, he has transitioned from being a dangerous Soviet asset to being a congressman. He wants to do the right thing and do it by the book, but his journey in Thunderbolts is one of learning that his sponsoring institution is rife with corruption. From his introduction, we realize he's profoundly ill-suited to this job. In his first scene, he's swarmed by a gaggle of reporters outside of Valentina's congressional hearing. They ask for his perspective on a particular policy concern, and he responds clumsily with stock politician speak that fails to cohere into anything remotely coherent, let alone answer the question they're asking. Bucky wants to button up and do right, but this isn't his world. This isn't really how stuff gets done, especially in this world. These aren't his skills. He wants to get to the bottom of Valentina's corruption, but there's an apparatus working against him. Meanwhile, Walker represents a guy who would love to be in Bucky's position, but can't quite hack it. He's deeply well-intentioned, but feels a sense of shame and resentment that he masks with a presentation of extreme confidence. When he was recruited to be Captain America, he was thrilled, but he has failed to meet the expectations and the demands of the job, costing him his wife and child. Not only does he feel he has failed as this public figure, he also knows that he has failed privately as a husband and father, and it's a while before that is revealed to his cohort. His ego gradually gives way to tenderness and insecurity, and only when he begins to let the wall down and reconcile with all the bad that he's done is he truly able to connect and gel with the team. While they may seem far different from one another at first blush, Red Guardian and Walker have a lot in common. When we first meet Red Guardian in the film, it's a sad state of affairs. He's drunk on the couch watching footage of his glory days in service of Mother Russia. He is genuinely proud of the work he did, but he also knows deep down that he was a tool of a propaganda machine and is virtually unknown in America. And even when it comes to the Soviet Union, he's not so sure that he wants to be in service of the state anymore. He wants to matter, but is that really how? Much like Walker, he became the face of a national identity, more fantasy than reality, and that can only hold for so long. When Yelena shows up on his porch, he reveals a deep sadness in his desperation to work for Valentina. All he knows is being a tool of the state. It was the last time he felt fulfilled and with purpose, and that's supposed to be read as kind of sad. When Yelena explains that she wants to move on to better things, he pleads with her to reconsider. But we can tell it's more of a vicarious desire to do what she does than pure fatherly support. He wants so badly to do something meaningful, but eventually he learns that it's better to work with others in service of others than to work for a boss or the state. He learns that the best thing is to be on a team and quickly joins his daughter in becoming that glue that holds the ensemble together. Now, if Yelena and Alexei represent the glue, Bob represents the space between. Lewis Pullman brings a brilliant, empathetic unwitting to a character whose everyman could be pretty generic in lesser hands, but he is excellent here. When Ghost, Yelena, and Walker are trapped in the vault by Valentina, they meet Bob, who is not a hero, not an asset, not anything recognizable to them, just a shockingly regular and vaguely sad guy. As confused as they are by his presence, Bob is even more confused. He has no recollection of who he is or where he came from. A clever analog for what happens when a massive franchise attempts to drop a new important character into the mythology without properly setting up their backstory. While he initially butts heads with Walker, whose insecurity leads him to degrade and dismiss another man without his perceived strength and principles, he bonds with Yelena, who senses the darkness that lies beneath his relaxed exterior. Bob has a history of substance abuse, self-loathing, childhood trauma, nihilism, all things with which an audience can empathize, but things that make him deeply insecure. After helping the Thunderbolts escape from the vault and sacrificing himself heroically, we learn that Bob was the lone survivor of the Sentry program, and against all odds, accomplished Valentina's purpose. He's invincible and all-powerful and, given his weakened mental state, susceptible to manipulation. After his act of heroism, Valentina persuades him to don the Sentry identity and do her bidding. He's initially reluctant, but she pokes very meticulously at his insecurities to get him over the edge. The next time we see him, he's had a makeover and now wears a traditional spandex superhero suit. Without his consent or input, he has been molded into the platonic ideal of the mid-20th century superhero, the kind of superhero that was America's greatest export for a long time, at least in terms of, entertainment. Sure, the costume closely matches the comics, but it's a very clear semiotic decision on the part of Valentina and the film to position him as a traditional, well-manicured Superman, whereas the other heroes have more modern, familiar takes on what we've come to expect from these films. Sentry represents the Golden Age. At his unveiling, Valentina instructs him to kill the Thunderbolts to cover her tracks, and initially, it seems like her plan is working perfectly. However, while he's willing to suppress and keep them at bay, he refuses to kill them. They pose no risk to him, and he takes the responsibility of his powers seriously. Then, it occurs to him that their partnership should be a collaboration, from his look to their values and even his name. But as soon as he expressed himself honestly, Valentina doesn't miss a beat in pressing the kill switch to end Sentry in his tracks. Naturally, this backfires and brings us to one of the more brilliant villains in Marvel history. Valentina's kill switch does not kill Bob, but robs him of his essential purpose and humanity. The Sentry is created as a tool of the government, and when that identity is removed, what's left is an infinite emptiness that consumes. On a thematic and character level, this represents the dark human struggle Bob possesses that is exploited by his government sponsor. A lot of the films and TV shows that cynically deploy trauma nowadays render trauma and mental health struggles as a purely inward struggle. But something Thunderbolts does that's special is it treats those struggles as a vehicle for empathy. In the film's most touching scene, one of the greatest in the history of the MCU, I gotta say, Yelena and her father have a very heartfelt conversation in the streets wherein Alexei manages to pull her deepest feelings out of her and help her navigate them. Yelena's past has been consumed by anguish. Yelena, like her father, spiraled into substance abuse after the loss of Natasha, and she has struggled to find fulfillment outside of self-medication. For much of the film, her father's presence makes her eyes roll, but when the stakes reach a fever pitch, she's confronted by the fact that they're much more alike than they may have once realized. Alexei reminds her in a very touching moment that her dream was to be the person people rely on when they fail. It's beautiful. A childhood of trauma, an adulthood of mental malaise, and all of that difficult experience therein comes together to give her the ability to empathize, not only with her father, but with the Void, more specifically with Bob. Alexei finally understands his failings as a father, his inability to be present and read the room when it comes to what people need emotionally. It's why he and Walker are much more alike than they are different. And I love the moment when Yelena is giving Red Guardian shit for being a bad father, and Walker subtly comes to his defense, before, being given an earful by Yelena as well. The scene on the street is so beautiful because Yelena fully breaks down. She says, "Daddy, I'm scared." She doesn't know how to navigate everything that's going on. Her father is right there, and she feels like he might be able to help. Alexei's got his own shit going on, and they all are able to come to the understanding that bad stuff is happening. Bad stuff has happened to them. They're all kind of fucked up in their own way. And so the only way forward is through shared empathy with one another. It's how we create a support system that allows us to be the best version of ourselves, that allows us to avoid the pull of the Void. It's a scene that's played with so much sincerity and heart that even when Yelena makes a joke at the end of it, which is also very in line with her character, it works because David Harbour as Red Guardian in that moment doesn't really acknowledge the joke or look at the camera. He just plays the moment completely straight, as any other character would if they were in that situation, but especially in the case of Red Guardian, as a father would in that situation. It's as if Thunderbolts as a movie is acknowledging the failings of what Marvel used to do and how it's rubbed people the wrong way and is actively doing something to better itself. I mean, this is the studio that popularized bathos as a thing. Remember when that used to be the most common criticism of the MCU? Yeah, well, there's not a whole lot of that here, if any. Thunderbolts is a movie about being better than what's come before. From their first meeting, Yelena and Bob connect in a space of memory, and he sees one of the darkest moments in her life, when she gave up a peer to be killed to demonstrate her loyalty to the KGB. By constructing these memories in space, the film creates a literal representation of empathy, further reinforced by Yelena's patience and understanding with Bob. Whereas Walker's narcissism and ego keeps the latest addition to the crew at an arm's length, Yelena seeks to understand him. She sees herself in his guarded sadness. Early in the film, she jokes with Bob that the best way to handle pain is to stuff it down so far you can no longer see it, and they share a laugh in their mutual understanding of grief and darkness. While this is a tender character moment, it also telegraphs the film's ultimate resolution. In a lot of stories like this, the takeaway might be that Bob needs to kill the parts of himself that constitute the Void, but in the Thunderbolts, the impetus is to understand them. It's not about pretending the parts of yourself don't exist, but about exercising them from time to time. Without Yelena's empathy, a realization like this couldn't be possible. In the metatext of Thunderbolts, Sentry's Void counterpoint represents the fundamental emptiness of the MCU in the wake of the Avengers. In the studio's hubris after the great success of Endgame, they have lost sight of what made their films great and have instead attempted to create metaphorical sentries, perfect box office machines engineered to elicit the desired audience response. What they've forgotten, however, is the core humanity that made their work so great to begin with. If you create a film whose only purpose is to cover the bottom line, but abandon it creatively, you will be left with an empty, corrosive vessel. But there's a ray of hope. Instead of destroying the Void or Sentry in the end, the Thunderbolts are joined not by a superhero, but by Bob, the complex humanity beneath the spandex. Instead of eliminating the dark parts of him, he is now supported by the people who will keep an eye on him. Collectively, they see what's important in each other, and they make a move to take down Valentina. However, in the film's most clever turn, Valentina lures the Thunderbolts into a press conference, echoing the end of the first Iron Man, wherein she proclaims these heroes the new Avengers, trapping them in a web of public relations and sparing herself the punishment she so deserves. This creates a brilliant stalemate where Valentina has the Thunderbolts cornered, but they also have her by the neck. As long as they're in her employ, they have the leverage to keep her in check. In essence, she is a new Nick Fury, one more complex and morally gray than what we saw in the original Avengers. and represents the nature of a figure like that in today's world. In fact, the film as a whole feels like a generational statement for the millennial ennui felt growing up in the wake of 9/11. As millennials, and yes, I am one of them, every major event that's happened in our lifetime is directly correlated to decisions made before us. The things that happened to us, with very little consideration or care as to how it would affect our future. No roadmap on how to navigate it. We often feel behind and inferior, working harder and longer for a retirement that'll never come. This is especially true when compared to our parents and success and milestones they managed to achieve at our age. The idea that all the success, excess, and glory has been sucked dry and we're left to make the most of what's left of it in a world that clearly has no room for us. I'm talking about our reality, but I might as well be talking about the MCU. The heroes of Thunderbolts, these new Avengers, are plagued by boredom, lack of purpose, and fulfillment in their current occupation, numbing themselves with substance and social media. In the case of Walker, he overinflates the importance of his work, taking things a bit too seriously because he wants to matter, wants to mean something, even though deep down, he knows it doesn't. A futile attempt to fill a void with a void. In the opening, Yelena narrates the action of her own fight scene, calling the predictable shots before they happen. She's seen this before. We've seen this before. It's not impressive, even if the action choreography is. It's actually expected, and our hero knows it too, drifting amidst a sea of apathy and disinterest. Like many millennials, they were expected to follow a path similar to those that came before them, the heroes that came before them, but are simply not built, equipped, or even interested in living up to those expectations because the world simply is not the place it once was. It's fractured and far less stable. The product, the mess of the generation who preceded them. Gone is all the pomp and circumstance. Instead, the Thunderbolts, millennials, arrive too late to the party. The leftovers consist of reheated nostalgia, a reminder of the glory days as, again, Alexei sits on his couch, drinking alone, his home a mess, watching highlights of his time as Red Guardian as a symbol of national pride and purpose. Many of us didn't get a chance to experience these glory days, and what we did experience was either short-lived or severely lacking in said glory. Who has room for national pride and the American dream in a world where your country's actions aren't anything to be proud of and the dream is proving to be unattainable, even for some of those who came before? The Avengers established an expectation, something to strive towards, while simultaneously reshaping the world in their wake, making it impossible to follow suit. This is not too dissimilar to the internationalism that determined the image of 20th century America following the end of World War II. The actions of this attitude eroded what was once a shiny beacon of hope, eventually culminating in 9/11 and the War on Terror. It's therefore fitting that the embodiment of this attitude, the superhero, particularly the Marvel Cinematic superhero, should follow suit, given how intrinsically linked the archetype is to American culture and how its 36 films and 15 television shows and specials have helped pave the way for superhero fatigue. To me, and many others, 2012's The Avengers always felt like an analog for 9/11. A national catharsis opening the year after Osama bin Laden's death, with its third act set piece invoking the terror of the attack and our heroes, the soldiers enlisted to, avenge it. This idea to turn our superheroes into soldiers becomes clearer when you consider how steeped the iconography is in the military-industrial complex, that the team is comprised of an ex-weapons manufacturer, a literal super soldier, an atomic green rage monster made up of gamma radiation, government assassins assembled and deployed by S.H.I.E.L.D., a stand-in for the CIA, and its director, Nick Fury. These trappings represented a kind of quote-unquote necessary American exceptionalism and dominance. The actions of this small army were necessary acts in the name of security and freedom, and while its members may have developed a distrust in a broken system along the way, thus feeling the need to take matters into their own hands, their method of policing the world on their own terms is simply recycling the same idea that will inevitably culminate in something similar to that which birthed the Avengers in the first place. As Ultron so fittingly points out in Age of Ultron,
you want to protect the world, but you don't want it to change.
In the context of the MCU, this is the formula that allowed the studio to rise to prominence, and the fatigue, a byproduct of its persistence. Just look at films like The Marvels or Captain America Brave New World, films that uphold the politics and self-righteousness of a post-9/11 America in the 2020s. Two monumental flops that feel horribly out of touch with the current moment. I'm not going to get into the weeds on that, but if you want to hear my thoughts on that, you can check out my breakdowns of both of those films respectively. We live in a world where America is no longer the hero, its actions morally dubious at best. The heroes of Thunderbolts know this, and in the context of the film, it's presented as the collapse of the Avengers, the heroic self-image of America. How can you expect them to be the new Avengers when they no longer believe in the idea that the Avengers represent? This identity crisis permeates the entirety of Thunderbolts. Not only are the heroes enduring this crisis on a personal level, as we've discussed, but the world at large and the faces of it are a reflection of this. The arrival of Donald Trump in 2016 signaled a willingness to embrace the ugliness of America without any pretense. Gone is the myth of American exceptionalism and morality, and with it, the idea of heroes. This is the true face of America. As Val says during her impeachment trial, we have no reliable heroes, and later on, doubling down on this idea with, again, I'm gonna quote it, there are bad guys and worse guys. As I mentioned, given the military-industrial complex imagery associated with the Avengers, the team was always presented as national heroes, soldiers. But what happens when almost 2 decades of fighting and violence, 2 decades of the Marvel formula, tarnish that identity? When the goodwill that forged heroes is depleted, and the crumbling of morality, of national pride, has exhausted any and all allegiance to the state, to the studio. Thunderbolts rejects the notion of heroism built around a national ideal, instead retorting that our loyalty is to each other, not flags or conflicts, and our morality is defined by our capacity for empathy. The onus is on us. The climax of the film invokes the imagery of the Avengers, 9/11, with Sentry, now void, laying waste to New York City. However, this time the roles are inverted. Val, the new owner of Avengers Tower, inhabits a Tony Stark-like role as she meets the Thunderbolts in a scene mirroring Stark's own conversation with Loki in the 2012 film. The heroes are identified as the villains by the state, and the villains tout themselves as the heroes. Instead of a faceless adversary, foreign terrorists, the Thunderbolts are up against a Superman-like figure handcrafted by the director of the CIA. A figure built to inhabit the traditional American superhero archetype, but whose appearance masks a troubling reality, a void. The threat is homegrown, the decaying face of a once idealized reality. It's the people versus America, the Thunderbolts versus the MCU. It's therefore fitting that the heroes of Thunderbolts are no longer avenging the death and destruction that perpetuated a cycle of violence that shaped this moment, but rather responding to the moment with true bravery and heroism, saving the innocents from harm's way, not shooting their way out of it. After failing to stop Sentry through brute force and violence, the Thunderbolts take a different approach. They learn to stop being soldiers and start being heroes. This is what allows the film to connect with the early MCU in a way no other film post-Endgame has, and why it speaks directly to the feelings of those who grew up with it, those millennials. That may sound heavy for a superhero film like this, but it feels like the right move for the franchise, one that acknowledges the nuances and struggles of existing at this moment in time and how we view heroism at this point in time, and also how we view the larger MCU. The Thunderbolts are the new Avengers, and they're throwing out the playbook in order to do something different and refreshing, and dare I say, more heroic than anything else that's been going on in the MCU up until this point. So, you know what, Sam Wilson, fuck your copyright claim. These guys are the real Avengers, not the state-sanctioned clowns that you're gonna be running. In a less elegant transition here, I also just gotta say that the Thunderbolts looks, dare I say, excellent. I mean, the practical set pieces and the cinematography make for the best looking Marvel film since Guardians of the Galaxy 3. And before Guardians of the Galaxy 3, I mean, I can't remember the last time a Marvel movie looked this good. It's one of the very best in the history of the studio, and I can't wait to watch it again and relish that look and feel. When Florence Pugh does the stunt off the second tallest building in the world, like, That's fucking cool, man. Like, that's stuff that you expect to see in a Mission Impossible movie that Florence Pugh and Jake Schreier took into heavy consideration. Like, these are real people in a real world, and you want to craft a film that has the verisimilitude to bring these things to life. It's why the Bucky scene where he flips the Humvee is one of the most epic and impressive looking action set pieces in one of these films in years. Like, I can't believe that we got a scene where Bucky looks like fucking Arnold Schwarzenegger from T2 and is pulling off this insane action stunt for real. It's him rejecting the system that held him back. Things are not getting done. He's just gonna go back to being the Bucky that we all know and love. He's gonna become a leader, having gone through all this stuff before. I mean, I could go on and on. This film is fucking great. If you haven't noticed, I haven't felt this giddy leaving a Marvel movie in years. Thunderbolts is just fantastic. You may have noticed that this video relies significantly more on characters than on plot, and that's a testament to what the film does so fucking well. I mean, scenes like the conversation between Yelena and Red Guardian on the street when she says, "Daddy, I'm scared." It represents a raw humanity that we haven't seen in a Marvel movie outside of James Gunn's Guardians films. The conviction of the performances and the quality of the writing, the authenticity and the sincerity make for a moment I never thought we'd see again. Jake Schreier has done something truly special. This guy fucking gets it, and he was allowed to cook. He was allowed to cook hard. Like, we're getting a gourmet meal here. In Thunderbolts, we truly have an ensemble to root for, to invest in. It's a Phase 1 style character piece about finding fulfillment, embracing our demons, and the support system needed to save us from the pull of the void. It's very hopeful, and instead of casting characters in rigid binaries, it presents a way forward to redemption. It's a witty, mature, singular vision from Jake Schreier, and dare I say it, top shelf Marvel. If you love James Gunn's Guardians trilogy, or the films that made this sprawling franchise great to begin with, you'll be delighted by Thunderbolts. It's brimming with heart and sincerity, culminating in an Inception-style climax. Also kind of reminds me of Legion in a way that sticks the fucking landing. It's no secret that I was cautiously hopeful that this would buck the trend of the recent MCU. And you know what, man? Thank God it does. Because cape flicks, they don't get much better than this.
Yeah!